You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Mike Steidemann is with me. He runs programmatic video for Mindshare, including YouTube and a bunch of other programmatic sources, and probably some non-programmatic as well. So my first question really for you, thanks for joining me. First question really is, video is often considered more of a branding vehicle, but others use it for direct response. So can video advertising really bridge both of those gaps?
Yeah, and actually, first, let me say maybe I should have updated my LinkedIn profile a little better. But right now, I'm really focusing on YouTube. So I came in a couple of years ago and doing all the programmatic, but really, last couple of years have been all on YouTube. It's been a nice little stint. But yeah, in fact, we do lower funnel marketing all the time on YouTube. One of the great things about working with Google you could use it for anything, but just their level of targeting, they know more about you than pretty much anyone in your family does, any of your friends. And so we get all kinds of signals, all kinds of keyword targeting, all kinds of, taking people off of Google search and then retargeting them on YouTube. And there's a lot you can do there. So I think it's actually great for lower funnel targeting, and probably, in some ways, very tangential to search.
Yeah, well, clearly retargeting search visitors and retargeting site visitors in general has been like a mainstay of all programmatic really over the years. And search retargeting may in fact be the most powerful. It's got such strong signal, right? People raise their hand, they did a search on a particular keyword. And so,
if you have to meet the person who does a search for something they don't want to know.
Exactly. Well, they're very bored, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess one of the big challenges with doing sort of lower funnel only video on YouTube is that if you're not a big marketer with a big data set, is getting scale. So how do you, when you're talking to your clients, and maybe they're not some of your very biggest clients, maybe a mid-sized client, and they're sort of looking to get more scale out of YouTube, and they're sort of running out of that super niche targeted inventory, and they're sort of starting to move into sort of slightly less strong signal. How do you advise them on sort of a strategy to grow their YouTube spend still on a direct response KPI?
Well, so yeah, I mean, you can kind of spool up and down in terms of targeting. And so you can get really specific, but then something that some people would say is specific in the auto industry, which is something as simple as in market for trucks or in market for SUVs. Like, I don't even consider that specific enough. Like, we want to go right to the model, whether we're talking about our own vehicles or whether we're conquesting some competitors, we're looking straight to the model. But there are times, let's just say, particularly around sales event, where some of those, let's call it looser targeting, things like in market for SUV or market for truck, those come in really handy. And I mean, Google has way more inventory than most people have to spend. So you don't, that's a long road. You got to go for quite a while before you get to the end of it.
Right.
I haven't hit that point yet, and we do branding as well, but the difference is that the cost is much cheaper on the branding side. When you don't have to layer on any kind of targeting, it's significantly cheaper for your per view. So
right. Well, certainly the shiny object in the video advertising space right now is probably TikTok, right? They don't know nearly as much about you, but it's getting a lot of attention. So do you think TikTok is going to become a legit competitor to YouTube for either branding or direct response?
I think so. Well, I don't know if I'd call it a direct competitor, but I look at it in terms of, and of course, now being on camera, I'm going to freeze up a little bit, but I'm going to forget some of my terms. But I just think that YouTube has done such a good job with the algorithm. That's what makes YouTube so powerful. And TikTok, I think, is doing the same thing, except they're doing it with even smaller bits of I call it a dopamine feedback loop, or you could call it a dopamine slot machine. Actually, probably better would be a dopamine Rube Goldberg machine, or Goldberg. What's that word?
I think it's Rube Goldberg. Yeah.
Yeah, Goldberg. Yeah, where they have all the strange things happening, and sort of in a way that might actually be a better analogy for TikTok or YouTube, because their algorithm is just so good. And one of the things, actually, I don't know if you watched the IAB New Fronts, but both YouTube and TikTok were the only two I saw that called this out. But I believe YouTube said 80% of people said YouTube makes them happy. And for TikTok, 92% of people, if I'm remembering correctly, said that watching TikTok made them happy. Now, that's kind of insane if you think about it, that you can't get 92% of people to agree on anything, especially in today's world, right? But so happy people tend to interact with the product more, but it's called, there's a podcast I listen to, and he uses a term called the pleasure trap. There's actually a book he wrote called The Pleasure Trap. And it's basically this idea of any supernormal stimuli that didn't exist in the evolutionary or in our ancestral environment, things like drugs or, basically TikTok or unlimited high saturated food, salty foods, like things, there's a reason why people have, in general, we're having a really big hard time with being overweight and eating unhealthy. It's because it's working against us. If we had a chance to get something highly saturated in fat or salty or sweet, like we wanted to eat it because it was generally highly caloric. And so the more calories you could get, the better chance of survival. Well, the problem is now we're at this point of abundance where we have more problems with having too much food than problems with having too little food. So I kind of think that TikTok and YouTube are both examples of pleasure traps. Even for my kids, like I don't let my kids stay on YouTube too long. Otherwise, they'll just watch Minecraft videos all day. I'd rather them play Minecraft than watch Minecraft videos.
Yeah, that's always a surprise, is that they enjoy watching other people play just as much or maybe more than them playing themselves.
I don't know. Everyone always says that's a surprise. And people were surprised by Twitch. And I was always looking at like all my friends who would literally sit around for 7 hours a day on Sunday watching football, which was never me. I never quite understood that. It just wasn't that wasn't my niche, right? Like I wanted to watch video games, let's say. And they were amazed that people would watch video games. I'm like, but you watch games all day. Like what? I don't see the difference.
Same difference. It's a sport, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, one thing with regards to the pleasure trap, right? Obviously, direct response marketers in particular would like to interrupt that person's train of thought with a video. And they'd like them to actually do something else, right? Go do something else, which I find that the format of video and the algorithm being extremely good on TikTok is actually sort of makes it even more difficult to get somebody to stop what they're doing and go do something else. So it always struck me as a little bit more of a branding vehicle because of that. Like my kids remember the ads they see, but if you ask them, would you actually not go to the next TikTok video and instead go to the ad you saw, they'd be like, oh, no, I would never do that. Right. So it does sort of create a little bit of a disconnect from a measurement perspective.
I have two thoughts on that. First off, I probably should admit that I downloaded TikTok and deleted it almost immediately because I'm like, this is dangerous. I got to get rid of this thing. So I don't have personal experience with it, but I think with Facebook, like it's a similar idea. And I saw how that took off with certain people and trying to get faux status and trying to get likes and all that. And kind of some of those same biological things were going on. But I would say when you're happy, you tend to do things like make purchases more than if you're upset. And I don't remember the reason why, but your particular question, I forgot what it was now, but there was
really just trying to get the direct response outward click. It's much more difficult, at least based on my observations. It's people who are on TikTok will tend to stay on TikTok and just move to the next video.
Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. Unlike Instagram and some of the other sites like Twitter and whatnot, they generally tend to feed you things that you've previously liked or things that you've friended or things that whereas TikTok will actually show you things completely outside your scope. Their algorithm is different. It's set up that way. I was just listening to a podcast about this, talking about how the Communist Party kind of just recently took an interest in the sister company. And so I think Biden, yesterday brought up banning TikTok again because of this. So the Communist Party took partial ownership and I think one of the 3 board seats on the sister company. And they're afraid that might kind of spill over. And because TikTok is so good at just their recommendation engine that doesn't feed off what you already necessarily friended or liked. I don't know if how it works on TikTok. So if you don't friend or like something, I apologize. But that they're worried that if the Communist Party can start getting things in and making it so that people are much more friendly to the idea of the Chinese Communist Party because of the way they're feeding them videos through there. So, if they can be that good at feeding you stuff that they think you might like, I have a feeling they could probably get good at feeding you things you might buy. I could be wrong on that though.
Right, right. Well, I think everyone will be experimenting with it, right? We've run a few experiments, but it's so hard to measure because the people don't take the action immediately. Generally, and we don't have a client with a big enough TikTok budget by itself for us to definitively say. So we're looking forward to continuing to experiment with it. I think it certainly reaches a demographic that is otherwise difficult to reach, right?
Yeah.
So for a marketer, if there's a demographic that is on TikTok and you need to reach them, which really very few of my clients have that demographic. Some of them are B2B and, just in completely different categories. But, I would certainly include it in a media plan for testing purposes if the demographic match was strong enough.
Yeah. I do know that even though I don't use it, I do know I bought it on TikTok Talk. So if you're really thinking about it, you should watch some of those. I bought it on TikTok and see what kind of things they're buying. And
well, I clearly people are buying some stuff on TikTok. There's got to be direct evidence and maybe some anecdotal evidence. So obviously, media buying and media targeting, is just sort of half of the equation. You have to get the timing right, so it's right message, right time, right audience, and so. YouTube gives you a lot of levers for audience, and but obviously you also need to get the timing right. Recencies could be important, particularly cars. People are in market for a while. Bouquets of flowers, maybe not so much, right? You buy it within 24 hours of your initial interest level, and so what are some best practices around trying to make sure you get that right message part in there as well? Like should you be zeroing down your message down to the individual, like conquest ad? Like if should you be running separate ads down to the model number if you're in the auto business, for example?
Yeah, actually, so nothing I say here is going to be confidential, but if you've been on YouTube or if you go to the Ford channel, you can see these. It's no secret that we have a lot of head-to-head videos. And so it'll literally say, I think it says 6 times in our Escape video, thinking about buying the RAV4, you should buy the Ford Escape for, we have additional trunk space, we get better miles per gallon, we have more leg room, we have, park assist. And so it'll go through and list multiple things that we have a better in-class rating on. Mm-hmm. And those actually work really well because I attribute, again, going to psychology, I attribute it to loss aversion. So it's one thing to just be shown an ad, but it's another thing when you're actually researching a vehicle and all of a sudden you get an ad that says, oh, by the way, you're thinking about the RAV4. Maybe you should think again because of, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
People are more afraid of losing $5 than gaining $5, according to the whole loss aversion theory. And so I think that's why our conquest, because normally, again, in all other examples of conquest is significantly worse than retention, which in the auto industry is just basically fishing in your own pond. It's fishing for people that messaging to people who are already interested in Ford. But surprisingly, when you layer on some of that stuff and you make it very specific, it actually, it's not as good as retention, of course, but it's way closer than I would have expected.
Yeah. I believe it. We did a test in search when we had several hotel brands and we were trying to determine, what was the next best indicator of booking intent, and the next best performing keyword was the competitive keyword when we were able to buy it, or sometimes we would just buy the competitive keyword only for retargeting purposes, right? But not in the SERP, because in the SERP obviously you have all sorts of rules about not being able to use it in your ad, and then your quality score plummets. So, but outside of the SERP, you could still use the competitive keywords, and they were really strong.
It's a good in-market indicator for sure. They might not want your brand, but they want some brand.
They're buying something, basically. Yeah. So it might as well fight for it, right? So,
and even, there's ways to layer on things. So even when you're doing, of course, I'm talking about the keyword targeting again, but you can layer on something as simple as in-market for motor vehicle. And that basically just shows a rough indication that someone's willing to buy. doesn't necessarily have to be a truck or an SUV or car, but they're in market for something, some motor vehicle. And so it helps to weed out things like, let's say we're using F-150 keywords. We don't want to get F-150 tug of wars. Now, maybe that's okay if they're actually going to buy a car, but if they're not, if they're just watching those for entertainment, then that automatically weeds those out when you layer that data source on. So
Right, right. How do you think about sort of balancing scale against targeting? Like, do you layer things on in particular order? Like, obviously, it sounds like keyword you would layer on early. It sounds like you might layer on in market. Would you do geography before you did that or afterwards? Because obviously, geography correlates really highly to wealth and or income, right? So it's a proxy for that. Like, within certainly at the zip code level, it's a strong proxy for that. So when you're sort of thinking about layering to, deploy more spend, is there sort of a best practice there?
So it's interesting. So geo sort of has a very unique use in the automotive world. And I guess you could say we sort of have three tiers, right? So tier one is generally like make the product look cool. But it can also be a why to buy, because we have a shopper layer that's in the tier one space where it's people are looking to buy a vehicle. And so we generally tend to give them things like features as opposed to emotional type messages, which is more of the awareness piece. But then under that, there's a tier two piece, which is when you think of all the local dealers that pool their money. Well, you might not know this, actually. I don't know if you've done auto. So they would pool their money so they could hit the whole DMA, because you couldn't target by TV or newspaper or radio, just in your specific area. And so all the dealers for Detroit, let's say, would pool their money, and then they do a TV buy and a newspaper buy and a radio buy. Now, that's sort of just been legacy. And even 10 years ago, they probably could have switched to zip code targeting, and they never did. They kind of kept the FDAF model, or the tier two model. But there are tier three advertising where the dealers are actually going out and buying just their own zip codes. And that's working as well. And that's more of the where to buy, like, hey, come to my dealership.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can layer it all that way. Again, though, I would just say, even for a big advertiser like Ford, we haven't run into the issue of really running out of a ton. I mean, those pools go pretty deep for quite a few of the targeting types we do. And when you get into the generic stuff, they're basically endless. It's just oceans of YouTube.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm used to advertisers where the consumer is not in market every 5 years or every 4 years the way they are with automotive. So you've got a huge pool of buyers constantly that you guys can go fishing for. So
yeah, one day in life, I want to go to the opposite end of the spectrum, which I think is probably print cartridges. I'm assuming that's the fastest sale, because as far as I can tell, if you haven't sold your print cartridge through advertising in about 15 minutes, those people are leaving to go to Staples.
Yeah, so, you have a very, very short recency curve on toner, right, and print cartridges. So the other question that relates to sort of right message, right time is, and obviously you've got these various tiers, is creative burnout, right? Do you feel like there's a sweet spot from an impression count perspective where if you start to feel like a considerable portion of the audience has seen it X number of impressions, you're going to go back to the creative agency and say, hey, we need something fresh?
So yes and no. For one, Ford has a lot of ads, and there's a lot of different tiers going on. There's really 3.5 tiers, like I was saying. And so each message is different. And then there's multiple messages at each one. So, and then also one thing that's really nice about YouTube is most of the stuff we do is true view. So if the user's already seen it, they just hit skip. And if we're advertising at a cost per view, we don't have to pay if they hit skip. We only pay on views. So that's nice. The other thing I would say is, man, I wish I could remember. There was a saying, I think it was like Babe Ruth, maybe this was attributed to, where he said, every time I go out, I play like it's my first game, because for some kid out there, it is their first game they've ever seen. So he basically plays his heart out, because even though it's his like 500th game, it's some kid's first game and he's there playing for them. And so in our world, there's always churn. I mean, you're only in, I would say awareness could get worn out. You could get worn out on awareness if you didn't like the message. And I can give a specific example about that if you want. But once you're down in like the shopping stuff or the regional stuff or sales event, like that stuff is much more specific and much more targeted. And people, you only buy a car, like you said, every multiple couple of years. And so you don't see those ads very often. Then when you do, they're probably really relevant. And then once those signals die because you stop doing searches and you're out of that pool, or you are no longer in the in-market pool, then you don't get those ads anymore. So they sort of rotate out. So there's always this influx of new kids at the ball game, I guess. We're there to see Babe Ruth play. So I don't know. I guess he doesn't get old as fast as he could.
So you mentioned TrueView. Are some agencies, and obviously you have a somewhat limited, or creative shops, you have a somewhat of a limited view on, but are they trying to cram stronger messaging into the first 5 seconds, or before the cutoff, so that they can essentially get a freebie, right? Even if there's going to be a skip happening?
So I've never heard it said that way, although I've thought of that, right? But normally you just look at it as, hey, we need to hook people. We have about 5 seconds. So we really got to make sure the first 5 seconds is good, because if it's not good, they're just going to hit skip. So it's got to catch your attention in 5 seconds. But never have we made an ad. And I'm not on the video production team. So maybe they have had this conversation, but never in a meeting, a cross-cultural meeting, have I ever heard, we just need to get as much in and then make it horrible right before they were about to pay. So then they skip right before we pay. Because I think, in all honesty, it would work against us. Eventually, Google's algorithm, because I can't say this for sure, but I have this inkling that probably Google's algorithm optimizes to them making money to some extent. And so just like on search, if you don't click, they don't make money. Well, on YouTube, if you don't view, they don't make money. So it's in their best interest to make sure you view. So if a ad tried to game the system, I think it would be weeded out, because they wouldn't make enough money.
Yeah. So you probably have to find that balance where you are trying to hook them to get them to watch the full ad and tell the story. So it's just, make sure the beginning of your story is strong, the same way it is in the newspaper, right? In the newspaper, for journalists, they use inverted pyramid style of writing, which is to put the butler did it as a headline, not like a mystery novel where you don't learn until the end that the butler did it, right? So, the ads have to be really punchy in the beginning, but continue to tell the story the whole way through. Otherwise, Google will, in fact, optimize you out, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned sort of the psychology of advertising a couple of times along the way. How did that end up being sort of part of your mindset, that you're sort of looking at human psychology and sort of the innate sort of brain training, as you mentioned, it's sort of prehistoric things that we're conditioned to do, pay attention to certain things, ignore other things?
Yeah, I think, well, for one, I didn't, my degree wasn't in advertising. I actually had a degree in political economics and chemistry. And then I got a master's in teaching. So I was going to go teach. And just by sheer supply and demand of teachers, and my buddy being in an advertising agency, it was like, hey, you can't get a job in the summer. Why don't you just come do this internship and we'll have fun all summer? And then after having a blast that summer, I basically got an offer and just decided to stay. And here, I don't know, what is it, like 17 years later or 15 years later? I'm not really sure, but I'm still in advertising. So I think I come from a little different view, and I'm always interested in learning new things. And I think because I wasn't sort of trained on the advertising side, other things will pop up for me that might not necessarily pop. When you're like too close in the forest, you can't see the trees. And so maybe I think that I come from this outside perspective. And so as I was learning about evolutionary psychology, just opened up my eyes to so many things about the world and the way things worked, and men and females, and men and women, I should say, and everything going on in the world, and how we interact with each other, and why we have friends, and why we trade. And it made so much sense. And then I started seeing little inklings of it in, my world in advertising, and it would just sort of apply. And so even I like TrueView. For one of the reasons I like TrueView is because if you make a choice, even if it's a bad choice, because of confirmation bias, you will believe that your choice was good. So that's how you get people that kind of believe crazy things, like the earth is flat. Their confirmation bias is so strong that they can't even admit that they're wrong about the earth being flat. And so, if someone chooses to watch an ad and doesn't hit skip, they'll actually like the ad more. They'll think it's a better ad than if they were forced to watch it when it wasn't their choice and it was just kind of stuck in their face. And so that's why I'm a big fan of TrueView versus forced view, where people can skip.
Yeah, I think the empowering the consumer is key. My first book was called The Eyes Have It, which was also somewhat of a play on words. Um, and I was talking about the power of the consumer to either consume the ads or not consume the ads. And this was when TiVo like first enabled TV skipping, right? And I was really talking about, okay, now you guys have to come up with good ads, because if they're not good, I had no idea TrueView was coming down the pike, right? But already I was basically saying that now you got to up your game, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you don't up your game, if you don't have good targeting and great creative, you're going to get tuned out digitally, as opposed to just them going to take a bathroom break. They'll digitally tune you out. So
I remember the first TiVo I ever got. That was amazing, being able to skip.
Right. Well, here we are, years later, and TrueView ads have become almost the norm or the standard. And I do like the fact that you were emphasizing the fact that the consumer is making a sort of an it's not really an opt-in choice, but they're choosing not to opt out of watching the ad, right? And maybe their finger just wasn't near the mouse at the time or whatever, but still, it's sort of like once you make it past that gauntlet as the advertiser, you're in, right? And they'll probably finish out the video. So other than YouTube, obviously, you're probably keeping your eye on a bunch of other stuff that's going on in OTT or in addressable video. Is there anything that you think is particularly exciting for the future that you're looking forward to sort of keeping an eye on?
I mean, I was really pleased with Peacock. First time I downloaded the app and used it, like I love how they took advantage. And actually, speaking of TiVo, I always thought TiVo should do this, whereas you're fast forwarding through, they would at least just put the logo, the brand of the commercial you were missing. So you could just get like that branding as you're fast forwarding through. And Peacock did that. I don't know if you have the app, but when you hit pause, it just throws up a logo on the screen. And I just think that's just a really good use of, they're going to see it when they pause, and then they get up, go get water or whatever, come back. They're going to see it before they unpause. And right. I think that's great. So I liked Peacock a lot. They did something else too. I like how they have the little countdown, which other people have done as well, but they have limited ads in their pod. It's much better than Hulu in my opinion.
Right. Well, clearly the format for the future at this point seems to be video. Like the other stuff is just not considered as effective, not considered as sexy. And the reality is back to your sort of primal instinct, you want motion and sound, right? So it makes sense that video would come back from TV to become the predominant ad format for digital as well. So I look forward to seeing what the industry comes up with over the next couple of years. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, particularly with regards to YouTube.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the best I've ever heard it said was a display ad never made you cry.
Exactly. You can't really tell a story in a display ad, even rich media.
Nope.
All right. Thanks again. Appreciate it, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.